Welcome to episode 74 of the Necronomid.com. I am James Sabata, horror author, screenwriter, co-host of the podcast you're listening to right now. And one time, I took an Uber, and I didn't even tell the driver that I write.
And I am Don Guillory, co-host of this podcast, author, historian, educator. And normally if I run into people I don't know in public, I don't discuss what I do for a living because I've had way too many awkward conversations, like my dentist telling me about how great my teeth were, and then going on to tell me about how slaves used to have their teeth ripped out and sold to make dentures.
Excellent. Why wouldn't he tell you that? That's wow.
Wouldn't have told me if I didn't tell him what my profession was.
That's true. Historian does that to you. All of a sudden, other people also know history facts and want to share them. So joining us today, we have Gemma Amor and Bracken MacLeod. Thank you both for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for letting me bully you into having me.
Yeah, that's why we're starting with you. You are here to talk about literally the scariest thing in the entire world, fragile male ego. So I'm so excited that you're here. Gemma, why don't you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, and then we'll kick it over to Bracken, and then I'm going to come back to you because I really want to know why you loved this so much that we had to do it.
Okay. So I'm Gemma. I can say with a certain amount of hubris, but I think I'm allowed a little hubris. I'm a Bram Stoker Award nominated author, and as of this year. And just today, literally put the finishing touches on book number 6, I think, and sent it off to my editor. So I'm feeling pretty good right now.
That's awesome.
That's wonderful.
Congratulations.
Thank you. It's like giving birth every time, just without.
What were you nominated for?
I was nominated for my novella, so for the category of first novel, Dear Laura, which is a psychological kind of a thriller, more of a thriller horror, I would say. It's not really a supernatural beastie, but it sort of deals very much with guilt and obsession and some quite dark and twisted themes. And it follows the story of one woman across the course of her life as she tries to handle a lot of these difficult emotions that come up as a result of abuse she receives at the hands of a mysterious letter writer called X.
We talked about it a little bit the last time you were on. It was at that point, the only book of yours I had read, and I adore it. Bracken, that brings us to you, man. You want to tell our listeners a bit about yourself?
There we go. Well, I'm a New England writer. Have a few books out from the last big one that came out was from Tor called Stranded. In between were a couple of smaller press books, a short story collection called 13 Views of the Suicide Woods, which I'm about to re-release because I got the rights back from the publisher, so I'm doing a new expanded edition of that, which should be coming out in the next couple of months. And then I have a new book coming out next year from Houghton Mifflin Harcourt called Closing Costs, which like Gemma's book is more of a psychological horror thriller than it is. It's got no supernatural element in it. It's all purely secular.
Nice.
And I was nominated. I've been nominated for a few things, but my favorite one so far has been the Splatterpunk Award.
Ooh.
I know. It's funny. I judge awards based on their statues. and if the statue can be repurposed into either a weapon or a bong, perhaps, then I think that's a really good award to win. And the Splatterpunk Award is just cool. It's sort of like this big obelisk. You could swing it like a bat, but at the top is this skull with a hatchet, buried in the skull. It's neat to look at. And if I had it on my shelf, it would upset all of my neighbors. So I need to write more Splatterpunk so I can win one of those.
Yeah, I was going to say, that means you definitely need it. If it's going to upset people, you should have one.
Exactly.
Have it.
I actually don't know the award, and maybe you guys do, but every time that I see Alan Baxter's pictures, he has these great awards in the back. That's the demon head looking thing.
Yep.
I don't know what that is, but I want one, and I'm sure I can't get one because I don't live in Australia.
I'm trying to remember the name of the award, but it's limited to Australian writers, and and it is the coolest statue ever. It's
It really is.
Big demon's head with these curling ram's horns, and like, damn, man, I would move to Australia just so that I could try to win that award, but. Yes, it's the Australasian Shadows Award.
Perfect. I will buy one on Etsy.
I know. Coming close to winning a Stoker Award, you get so excited because that house is so cool. Like that.
Oh yeah,
that statuette. It's just such a cool thing, and it's like I want one just because it's so beautiful, not necessarily because I need the accolades of the community as much as I just want to have a cool haunted house.
But if you don't win an award, you get a loyalty card, which was one of the highlights of my year this year.
Indeed.
Somebody sent me in the post a Bram Stoker Award nomination loyalty card, and basically had a hole punched in one of the slots, and it's like collect 10 nominations and get an award automatically.
Yeah. Every time you don't win, you get a punch, and if you get 10 punches, then you get sort of like a sympathy award. Yeah.
You do, which I kind of really like the idea of. There's not like a better metaphor for the year 2020 than like a small loyalty card for the thing you didn't win.
I'm going to be honest. I kind of want to win one that way because
it's a bigger honor to be the Susan Lucci of the HWA.
So yeah, let's bring this back to Gemma. Why did you pick this film?
I think this kind of like me coming back on the show came about because I battered you on social media and just said, I love this film so much, and if you don't have me back, I'm going to have a big tantrum. Or something along those lines, suitably aggressive, which is kind of fitting given the film. And I don't know, my friend and I kind of exchanged like movie recommendations for things to watch, and I just got the Shudder subscription so that I could watch Host, and then Scare Me released about a week or two later. And my friend messaged me and he was like, this movie is about you need to watch it. And I was like, yeah, whatever. And then eventually I did sort of sit down on a Friday night and I wanted to give it my full attention, and I turned it on, and I was wrapped for the entire thing. I was just like 1 hour 40. It's not a very long movie as well, which I quite like. I'm liking this trend in shorter, kind of tasty sized movies, tasty length movies. And I sat there kind of thinking I knew what it was, and then it sort of morphs and changes into something else, and then thinking it was going this way and that way, and just utterly blown away by the performances. But the script for me it's just like this shining jewel of a script, and it's funny and it's witty and it's full of pathos, but it's just got some really fucking themes that just went straight to the core of me. And I got to the end of the film and I was like, I love this movie and I need to talk to people about it. And then I thought, you guys, this is the place to be to talk about fragile male egos, as you quite rightly pointed out at the beginning.
I think that was a compliment. No, I'm kidding.
Because you know what the movie is about in a nutshell. It's about like kind of fragility of ego, and I think I guess the most obvious reason it resonates with me is as a female horror writer in the horror space, and some of the should we say behaviors I've been exposed to over a relatively short period of time, of kind of 2 years I've been doing this. It was so refreshing to see it held up in front of me in such a kind of enjoyable way, if that makes sense.
Absolutely.
Which is why
go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't
No. That was me. I'm going all misty-eyed now and like gazing into the distance.
Yeah, I think it's an amazingly insightful film. Because I'm watching it and I don't usually like to watch films about things I've done, right? Because you're so inside baseball, as they say. That there's going to be something that doesn't ring true, and it kind of ruins the concept for you. Like, watching a legal thriller. I used to be in my previous life. I used to be a lawyer in it, and I just can't do it because I can't stand to watch them get it wrong. And this movie got so much right about about the dynamics between writers and male and female writers. And it was like, I've seen this, sort of live in front of me.
And there were moments where I felt my innards just clench because of just the dynamics between Fred and Fanny, and just the idea of the writer's code and not stealing ideas and just all this stuff you don't really, as a non-writer, you kind of, okay, this is an entertaining movie. And then as somebody doing this shit day in, day out, and you sit there and you're like, oh my God. I was so drunk by the end of it with just high on this film. I was drunk on this film, not drunk. Well, I did have a drink, but I was high on this movie because it just, it just ticked all of my fucking boxes. And yeah, I could talk about it for days, which I probably will.
Excellent.
I've taken notes.
So I'm gonna come to you in a second, Bracken, for why you joined us. But really fast, I want to, from my point of view, we were doing all 31 episodes of The Simpsons Treehouse of Horror this month, dropping a different episode every single day. And back in September, September 7th, when we finished it, I was like, it's 2020 and we're going to get fucked and they're not going to drop the 31st episode, right? And Thomas, the guy that we did it with, just glared at me and he's like, don't fucking say that. Not glared. We weren't physically in the same place. That was the wrong word.
But you could feel his glare.
I could feel his anger.
Audibly glared.
And so it rolled around October 18th. And that morning I was like, it's still on. Holy shit. And they canceled it and they moved it to November 1st. And because of baseball, because they like money. And then they showed it to the rest of the world and not to Americans. And so we still went out of our way to get a copy of that. I didn't know we could do that, right? And I panicked and I was like, what are we going to do? But this had come along and we had talked about doing it earlier in the month. And then I was like, this is so totally Halloween. This is such a great thing to drop for Halloween, because Halloween when I was a kid, I don't know about any of you, but it was like me and my cousins, because I didn't have brothers and sisters, and we'd get together and we'd tell scary stories and we'd try to freak each other out. And that was part of the fun of Halloween. And I love that this movie literally handed me that. And then Gemma, you literally handed me a reason to do it on Halloween. So thank you.
And it's weird because in England, Halloween, sorry. It's not really as big a deal over here. And it certainly wasn't when I was a kid, in the 80s and 90s. It was, I don't think I went trick or treating once as a kid. Is that sad? That's really sad, isn't it? My kid goes all the time and it's more of a thing now. It's more commercialized, but there certainly wasn't any sitting around fires telling scary stories. And so from my point of view, I didn't have that. And I love seeing it in films and the idea of campfires and exchanging spooks. And I was kind of denied that, I think, as a kid. And so I'm really drawn to it as an adult. And also my little boy loves telling scary stories. He's 7, his favorite pastime is Mum, I came up with this scary story, and then his imagination just goes and runs riot. And I love that. I love that playfulness. That's awesome. It's kids' imaginations are amazing. But then a lot of that came out in this film as well. I felt like with the characters you were seeing kind of told their stories and go through it. You're seeing a lot of their inner child come out, with the werewolf story and things like that. I'm jumping ahead, but it sort of all ties together.
Yeah, definitely. So then, Bracken, you made a post on Facebook, and then I just wrote you going, you have to come on the show. You have to do this.
It's funny because I had picked this movie. I was doing the thing I usually do after we put our son to bed, which is I spend the next 40 minutes scrolling through Netflix or Amazon Prime. I can't decide on anything. And so we end up watching YouTube videos until we both sort of pass out. But I found, I saw the image for Scare Me and I read the brief little description. It sounded to me in the moment like an anthology film. We were going to have these writers who are describing their scary stories and you're going to cut to the scary story, sort of like a creep show kind of thing. And so I picked it, knowing absolutely nothing about it, just based on the idea that in 30 or 40 minutes, I can turn this off. And I ended up, just sort of being amazed at how perfect this movie was in the moment, and the fact that it wasn't an anthology made it so much better. And I just got really excited, and so I felt compelled to post about it. Like, I have a friend who constantly tells me, "You hate everything, Bracken." Right? Because he's like, "Did you see this film?" And I'm like, "Yeah, I saw that film. It sucked." And he's like, "Well, what about this one?" And I'm like, "Yeah, no, you have no taste, like literally no taste.
You've seen my work."
But we joke with each other, and I was so proud to have found a movie that I like that I had to post about it. I like a lot of things, but it's funny because I like a lot of things that are like this. I like small budget, intimate stories, and things that actually kind of have commentary in them. So, you're never going to see me posting, a favorable review of Saw 27, because I just don't think, that the franchise has much to say anymore, if it ever did. But a movie like Scare Me seemed so like on the nose, like so poignant in a commentary, not only about just storytelling in general, but about, like, I think what we're going to get into discussing about fragile, masculinity and the interactions between men and women.
But I think also that's what's so good about this film is that, on one level, it is about the male side of things and ego and fragility and being kind of shown up by a female writer and that side of things. But there is also a side to Fanny and her own ego is quite enormous throughout this entire film. And she basically uses Fred to make herself feel better about herself because she's bored. So I liked the complexity of that as well. It's like on one level, she's an incredible character. I was rooting for her the entire way, even though she wasn't actually a very nice human being at various points. But it just felt nuanced to me. Like, she's had enough of everybody's shit, and I wholeheartedly feel that. But at the same time, she wasn't this kind of perfectly blameless character in the whole thing. She was quite cowardly as well at the end. So, like Bracken was saying, it's the commentary of it, but it's a layered commentary. There's so much going on there, and especially if you go back for a second watch, knowing how it ends, and you can relax. When you relax more into a movie the second time round because you know where it's going, so you spot the little details you didn't before. And like the levels of kind of love for the horror genre in this film are insane. Like the foreshadowing, the cleverness of the writing, just it pops. And it's been a while since I've been that excited by a film as well. Like I watched Host, and Host blew me away by how original and scary it was, and how well executed. And I was really frightened at various points throughout. But this film, Scare Me, actually excited me. It should be renamed Excite Me, because it was I don't know, it was so fucking refreshing. Like, it was just so refreshing to see myself, I suppose, like mirrored in a lot of the action, but such a unique concept, but also a really simple one. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think it's a real gem. And I was looking at IMDb, and the score for it's only about 5 or something, and I was like, what the fuck? People are just kind of, it wasn't actually a scary movie in quotation marks, like there were no monsters. There was, I was expecting it to go, because actually even when I was watching it, I was expecting at various points throughout, because of the sound design and some of the foreshadowing, like supernatural elements. And then I realized it wasn't going to go in that direction, but maybe it's just a case of people think it's one thing and it isn't. And it's more like a stage play, which is again why it really appealed to me.
Right. Well, you could very easily perform this like live.
Yeah. And I'd pay good money to see that on stage as well, because I can just visualize how they would take that idea and run with it, and it would be glorious, and all the stage design and everything. But I'm guessing that's not what, like, horror is a funny space, isn't it? Particularly with movies. It's different to books, I think. There's a large chunk of people that only really want a couple of things when they watch a horror movie, and that is kind of Saw 27. They want Saw 27.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing about horror, is that because it covers so many different sort of styles and types of voice that you're always going to find somebody who hates what you're doing, right?
Yeah. Or
Because
it's not
they
even
wanted,
hate. They gravitate
or just-
towards the other
right.
things, like
because they wanted something different. Like, I'm looking on IMDb right now, and there's a person who wrote that they hated this movie because it's literally just two people talking about scary stories. No blood, no jump scares, no anything.
there we go. That's exactly what I mean. It's like
And it's like, well, I'm sorry, the movie wasn't what you wanted it to be, but it was, so I think that, there is probably a big part of the reason that the scores are so low is because people wanted what the movie really makes a lot of promises at the beginning that it doesn't kind of fulfill, or rather it fulfills them in a completely different way. So right, the setting itself is a horror trope, is that isolated cabin out in the middle of the Catskills, in the middle of nowhere, is the start of every Evil Dead zombie slasher crazy person movie. And so when you have two relatively sane people, and I'll say relatively because they're writers, so they're clearly not all there, right? But you have these two people who never turn into Jason or into a zombie.
Except
and so
he kind of does. That's the beauty of this film. It kind of does, which we'll kind of come to later. But like, there's so to jump in, because I'm getting excited now, and I knew this would happen, and I do apologize in advance for basically just not allowing anybody else to speak, because this is my movie. I'm so sorry. But like, what we were saying about foreshadowing, and say like the movie opens with this brilliant scene in a taxi, which we could go back to in a second, because it's so important for the whole, like, what plays out. But when Fred turns up to his cabin, and by the way, like, the whole idea of going away to write, before I was a writer properly, and if you watch something like Misery and you just think, oh, it's just a self-indulgent, slightly wanky thing that writers do to make themselves feel more like writers, and then you have kids and you realize the reason people go to a fucking cabin in the middle of nowhere is because you can't get anything done unless you're approximately 1,000 miles away from anybody you're related to, with no phone signal. So
absolutely,
I actually end up
social media.
I end up at the end of most of the novels I write, because the final stages of a novel, you have to be so immersed to make sure you tie off all those loose plot ends, so that you've read the manuscript for the 50th time in a row, but you still missed something, that things flow, and you have to have that absolute solitary kind of space in which to concentrate and focus, which just doesn't happen when your family are around, unfortunately.
Right. Or just a creative space filled with creative people, and I think this is a neat thing, because and we can sort of dovetail it into the beginning of the film, which is that the last few years I've gone to this writers retreat, which up until this year was, I think this was going to be its third or fourth year, was held at the Trapp Family Lodge in Stowe, Vermont. And it's wonderful because it's isolated. We do it in January, so it's always bitter ass cold and snowy. So there's the incentive to go out and explore the town is lowered, right? You want to stay in the hotel and in the lodge and write. And so it offers that kind of solitude. But the other thing that it offers, because it's a retreat, we have a big sort of banquet room with a bunch of tables, and everyone just sits at their tables with laptops, and everyone writes together, and no one talks. We just sit and work in the presence of other people working. And the neat thing about it is the mere presence of someone else being creative in the same room is inspiring, and helps you focus on work often.
And you see that with this film as well. And like Fred and Fanny are kind of telling their stories to begin with, and Fred is talking about his kind of reasonably weak ass shit werewolf story that she's really dismissive of. But as he gets into
it's more than reasonable.
But they feed off of each other. I mean, she's obviously a powerhouse of imagination and skill and dexterity when it comes to like telling stories and her imagination and stuff, but he's got a very vivid and healthy imagination. And as his confidence grows at the beginning, before it kind of turns a corner halfway through, but a piece of brilliant script writing, which again I'm getting all tingly about, but like they feed off each other, and that energy is there. And I think that was quite insightful. And I have a friend that I used to, before COVID, kind of meet in a coffee shop, and we would write together for once a week, and we'd completely ignore each other, but like just sit opposite each other and write, and the mere act of that accountability in the presence of someone else doing the same thing as you, because it's an incredibly solitary job, this.
Right. Yeah.
You live in your own head, and yeah,
it's funny because you say you ignore each other, but you're clearly not ignoring each other, right? You're using each other as inspiration and as finding camaraderie in the presence of creativity, and there's absolutely nothing ignoring about it. It seems to me, even though you're not chatting with each other, you're present together in a moment, which is a shared thing. That's kind of, because I've done the same thing. Had a friend over and we sat across the table and just wrote, and didn't talk at all. Just enjoyed the presence of someone else doing the same thing. And because it is such a solitary way to make an avocation or a vocation.
But I think, again, that's where this is so clever, because you see this blossoming relationship between Fred and Fanny, who meet, and she's not really that bothered by him, and he's completely awestruck by her. Mm-hmm. And then that kind of slowly morphs into something else where they become slightly more equal in footing, where he gathers in his confidence and his storytelling abilities, and she kind of warms to him. She's a bit frosty. But that relationship and that the way they are with each other is constantly then changing, and it just flips on a knife edge kind of later on. And I think it's so cleverly done.
Right.
The idea of two people in the same industry but different stages in their career, different, she's this accomplished writer, she's this successful woman, she's written, is it Venus? I think it's like an award-winning, critically acclaimed novel, and he's kind of this aspiring writer. And so if you go right back to the beginning in the taxi scene where Bettina, the taxi driver, who's incredibly annoying but still remains extremely polite even though he's a massive dick to her, which all kudos to her. There's this real eye roll moment where she says, "So you're a writer?" to him, and he's like, "Yeah, a writer, director, I'm an actor." And it's like, "No, you're not, mate. You're really not."
Triple threat.
Yeah, but he wants to be. This is what he wants. This is his dreams and his desires. And
the other thing this movie offers, which I think again is a little inside baseball. That's the only sports metaphor I know, by the way. So don't expect me to ever. Baseball. I don't. To be honest, I'm not even sure I know what it means. It just sounds really good when I say it. But it is a little sort of. A message to people in the industry, or at least Josh Rubin, who plays Fred, who also wrote and directed the film. This must be something that he's experienced, because the film explores not just the relationship between male and female writers, but also between aspiring, small, sort of indie press writers and big time. I hate to say big time because it sounds so arrogant, but sort of published by bigger New York or London publishers, right?
So like me and Bracken. So Bracken's published by Tor, and I'm self-published. Everything I've done has been self-published, or with a very small indie house. The three indie publishers I've worked with, two of them I broke within less than a year, and just republished the book myself. So I feel that struggle. I've noticed it, and
the thing. And I started out in small press. My first book was with a small press called Books of the Dead, publishing out of Canada. And to be honest, the only reason I got the Tor deal was because someone read that small press book and liked it.
What's weird with that is. My first short story was through Books of the Dead.
Oh, nice.
That's crazy. I've never heard anyone else say that. I just had to throw that in. Go ahead, Gemma.
No. So I think beyond the success metrics and the who you're published by and who does your work, and it's this added layer for me as a writer as well of with social media. There are definitely, and I'm trying to phrase this in a way which won't make me sound like I'm wielding a pitchfork, because I'm not, but it's a barrier that I've come across, that I've spoken to other female writers about and other indie writers about as well, is that there is a certain circle of, shall we say, successful, mostly male authors of a certain age, most of whom over the last year, I think I've gradually kind of weaseled my way into their consciousness and sort of introduced myself. I'm quite relentless in that, and it's fucking exhausting work, but you have to keep going and you just keep pushing yourself forward all the time. And gradually those people do sit up and they do take notice of you, and they do begin to engage with your work and converse with you and allow you into that sort of sacred circle a little bit. But that circle is still pretty tight, and it's a certain, how do I be put? It's a certain type of author,
right? Well,
and it's very difficult to break through that barrier. And so, for example, the way that manifests itself is you see anthologies, for example, with the same names again and again and again and again. Now, that's just part of the business, that if you're good at your work, then why wouldn't you be invited to come back time and time again? And if you're a well-known name, that sells books. And I totally understand that. But it doesn't often leave much space for people, I guess, like myself, who are scaling the mountain, like where do we go? Where's the path?
Well, no, it's a tough scrabble, because, you get invited to an anthology, and let's say there are 20 stories in the anthology, and the editor holds 4 open for for solicited submissions, new voices.
Yeah.
Even among those new voices are going to be established voices who weren't invited to the anthology, who love the idea of it and want to be in it. So even then, you're still competing with people who might have more name recognition and are going to be noticed a little bit more if the submissions aren't blind, right? And so it's always a struggle, no matter what, to get into those kind of books,
But you see when you bringing it back to the movie, you see that kind of that thing with Fred where he first meets Fanny, and she tells him what she's written, and the awe in his voice, and he's talking to someone he never thought he would have access to, because you do imbue these kind of hero writer characters with this kind of big you want them to notice you, and then when you do sort of eventually get on the radar and you realize they're just like everybody else and they're quite normal human beings, and you wonder why you were like that in the first place, why you crave the approval of people you've never even fucking met, because that's how the industry works, and you see that in Fred.
Right. Yeah. There's a lot of be careful about meeting your heroes. That is a true thing. I mean, fortunately, I think in the horror industry, most people I've met have been really great, and it's
absolutely.
And I don't know why that is. It's
none of this is meant to sort of imply that there is a plot or anything, but it's more that it's like a natural barrier that I think a lot of people don't realize is there.
There are dudes in the industry who are dicks. Right. And
of course,
and that's just kind of the state of the world. You're always going to have those people, and there's somebody out there who's a great writer who's an amazing jerk, right? But by and large, the industry is very welcoming, and it's very collegial. I think there's an element of the difference. So it's funny, getting to the movie, the relationship in the car between Bettina and Fred, right, is very much one of, what do you do? I'm a writer, director, actor, really. And Bettina is really impressed, and she's excited to have this person in her car, and she's socially very awkward, and so it's an awkward scene, and Fred's a giant jerk to her because he's got this level of ownership of the persona, which he's now lording over a person that he sees as not at his skill level. And then later on, when he meets Fanny, it's a complete reversal.
He does exactly the same. It's exactly the same.
Exactly the same that Bettina does. Yeah,
and it's cringeworthy to see, because we've all been there, right? We've all been there, and I felt that deep in my soul, that exchange in the car. I was Bettina at some point, and then I'm probably now a kind of Fred Fanny hybrid, sort of more of a Fred than I am a Fanny, but we've all been there, and it's just fucking, it just eats at you. And also particularly going back to the idea of being a new voice, I'm 38. I don't want to be a new voice. I want to be it's right. Just I felt like it was so sharp and so accurate for it just, you can tell, I think, that I don't want to make assumptions, but it felt very much like Josh Rubin had probably been through some of those struggles himself, and understood it at that level.
Right. And there is an element of self-defense in Fanny's character. When you see Fanny's sort of standoffishness about Fred being, a small press or an aspiring writer, in quotes, right? And she's a very well-established person. I mean, there is an element of self-defense in it. Like, there's a reason that Stephen King doesn't go to cons, right? And the reason is because he can't breathe at them. People come at him. They always want a piece of him. And I think there was a story about how, I think one of the last conventions he ever attended, he got up, he's in his hotel room on like the 14th floor or something, and some person had scaled the terrace outside of his room.
Jesus.
so that they could, get up close to him. And it was terrifying. And he just sort of, I think he realized that, that he can't be this person because the level of the sort of fandom that exists with his work is a barrier, right, to being able to really share with the whole community the same way that we go to StokerCon or whatever.
But yeah, so I think myself, like I do a shit ton of cons in a normal year. Like last year, I think I did 13 or 14. And it goes back to what you were saying about being around people that are creating, right? Mm-hmm. And that's what I get from cons. I get that energy. I get to see these normal people that I know have made this work, right? And that gave me the energy and the fuel to do what I do. And when you're king, you don't need that, right? No, and so like there's literally, I can't think of a single pro for King to want to go to something like that.
Yeah. I mean, if anybody that King wants to be inspired by, he can just reach out to.
Absolutely.
Right? I suspect if Stephen King wanted to have coffee with Neil Gaiman, he just calls Neil Gaiman. Right?
Like I knew he didn't do it, but I've never thought about a time that he did.
Right. Yeah. No, there was a time that he used to go to these things. But so I think that, it's neat to see, bringing it back to the film, neat to see this element of sort of insider perspective with Scare Me, where the relationship between Bettina and Fred and Fanny is tiered in a way, and they're exploiting those, all of them are sort of exploiting those differences in career accomplishment.
Don, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I was going to say, you even have that juxtaposition when Carlo enters later in the film, or I should say when he's exiting. He's awestruck by Fanny because he's a fan. He's read her work, and he starts, raving about her accolades, and then says she won every award, and says like, and then she goes through, it's like, well, not every award, only this, and this, and you can kind of see how Fred, who just is. Okay, here's where Gemma, I have to preface this because I don't want her to get mad. Fred's character made me dislike the movie. And I don't mean as far as like I didn't like the movie. It's just like I disliked him so much it ruined my enjoyment because I saw this just jealous piece of shit who just can't stand that somebody else is. And so it worked for me to sell me on the movie, to sell me on the story, because you put somebody in this movie that I absolutely hated.
That's exactly why they introduced Carlo, though. And I think that's what I was saying earlier about that masterstroke in screenwriting. Like, so you think you know what the setup here is. You think there's these two people and the whole movie is going to revolve around them. The taxi driver is just a kind of framing device. And then they introduce the pizza guy. They introduce Carlo, and he's quite warm, and he's really likable, and he's enthusiastic. He's really quite knowledgeable about her and her work as well. And the way she responds to him is instantaneously different to the way she responds to Fred, because she's got the measure on Fred almost immediately. And she sees kind of more of a kindred spirit in Carlo, but also he's a nice guy. There's nothing very unlikable about him at all. He's fun. And she likes to have fun, and there's an amazing scene where they crack out a couple of lines of Coke, and it's just really casual and normal, and it's the idea. Then I think you really start to see with the introduction of Carlo the way that Fred is almost instantaneously ostracized from something that he was warming to. He was getting comfortable with Fanny, and he felt like they kind of had a connection, and he was enjoying himself for the first time in however long. And you were kind of enjoying yourself with him, and you were warming to Fred, even though there were loads of fucking warning signs there to do with his ex and all the rest of it. You were warming to him anyway. And then his mean-spirited nature and his jealousy comes out with Carlo, who comes along and disrupts everything and turns the dynamic on its head. And it's so fucking clever the way that that's been done. And again, you can see that play out on stage very, very nicely if that was a stage adaptation. I thought it was a stroke of genius.
Yeah, Fred goes from having earned his way into the in group.
Yeah,
right. He starts out in the story with this kind of stupid idea, like this. Well, not a stupid idea, just not a very well formed idea. As she points out to him in the beginning, like, well, that's great, that's an idea, but it's not a story.
Yeah.
Right. Fanny immediately criticizes his werewolf revenge concept as just a concept. So he fleshes it out and he starts telling the story, and she gives him a little encouragement, right? Oh, yeah, that's scary, which inspires him, and he begins to really explore his own creativity in that moment. And they get to a point where he's told the story, she's given him what he needs, which is, she says, oh, you can be scary, right? And she starts telling the story, and he's feeling like they're becoming peers, is how it seems to me. But then, Carlo comes in, and immediately Fred is in the out group again, because Carlo is funny. He's easily, sort of cool and put together, and he wants to do coke with Fanny and have a good time. And Fred is on the outside looking in again.
And he looks painfully awkward, and you going back to the idea of seeing someone as a child, you see that inner child come out with Fred, and you get an instant sense that he was probably bullied as a kid. He probably didn't really make friends that easily, because he's a jealous psychopath, and his ego gets in the way. And I mean the dude works for an advertising company, and I don't mean to cast aspersions on people that work in advertising, but I've worked in sales and marketing for like 10 years, and sales in particular, there's a certain type of personality that you have to be. It's quite an aggressive industry. Advertising is no less aggressive. Like, there's just, you get a real sense of who Fred is when Carlo turns up that you didn't have before. And actually in the beginning of the movie, kind of Fanny is the bad character. She says at the beginning, in this lovely little bit of kind of red herring diversionary play, she says to him, "Are you scared of me?" Because she's quite aggressive, and she's holding a poker in one hand, and the way she stares at him is very confrontational. The way she talks, and she talks down to him like, you're not sure about this woman. And then it's all about flipping switches, this movie, and turning things on their head when you least expect it, or actually not when you least expect it, but when you get comfortable. When you get comfortable with the way things are, they fucking change. And I think that's so smart and so clever.
And I might be getting ahead of myself, but they totally pay off that fire poker thing at the end of the film.
Yeah, but there's loads of that. There's so much of that. I keep jumping in, but like the right at the very beginning, when he's in the cabin on his own, he walks by a block of knives and like run his hands over the kind of block of knives, and then he does this fucking Jack Torrance impression. He's Jack Nicholson, and it's like that. Jack Nicholson ends The Shining chasing Shelley Duvall around, and it's like. And then the fact that Fanny and Fred meet each other running, and at the end of the movie, Fanny runs away. It's just, all this stuff is so beautifully tied off and neat and tidy. And I'm going to be a bit of a Fred, and I really fucking wish I'd written this.
This film is firmly in the category of things I wish I had written, right? Because it's so brilliant. And it's funny because their meeting is. Their meeting says so much about Fred and sort of the dynamic between women and men generally, which is that Fred is out running, trying to get some exercise. He sees a woman, a complete stranger, right on the side of the road, not in his way, not doing anything at all that he would need to comment on, but he stops and engages her because he wants to know sort of her story and insert himself into it. Right. He could have just kept running and getting exercise, but instead he decides that he's going to stop and talk to this woman who doesn't necessarily want anyone to talk to her. Right. Because she's also out for a run.
It was very different to how he was with the taxi driver who wanted to talk to him. And he's obviously very driven by the fact that Fanny is pretty and young and he's attracted to that. He doesn't even tip the taxi driver. And like, I know in the UK, tipping isn't a thing. Like, we don't tip. It's not part of our culture.
In the States, it's
like, even I know that it's rude to not tip.
Especially if you were going out. Yeah, if you were going out that far as well, you're a dick if you didn't think about tipping. On top of that, I believe that this guy would have had an app where he could add a tip very easily. So he's just a bigger dick for not doing so.
He's just a complete dick. Which again, like, adds but he's kind of a harmless dick, if that makes sense. If there is such a thing.
Yes. He's that
I don't think there are. They're all very dangerous.
Yeah, it's inconsiderate because Bettina doesn't serve a purpose, at least in his eyes.
Yeah, exactly. She's not somebody that he deems worthy of conversation or attention. But then as soon as he sees somebody kind of attractive, and then he finds out what she does, it's like, it's that approval, that desperate craving for approval, but also wanting to have something and covet something. And then that comes out later when you realize his ex-girlfriend, has taken a restraining order out on him, or something like.
It didn't occur to me until just this second, but that also that gets mirrored when Carlo appears in the film too. Like, Fred has this reaction to Bettina, which is that she's unimportant to him because she's just a driver, right? And she's kind of a desperate seeming person.
Oh, for sure. And then Carlo is a pizza guy.
Yeah, and even though she gives him this idea that he ends up looking up later, when he's feeling blocked about his werewolf story. But then Carlo shows up, and he is also outside of sort of Fred's aspirational direction, right? He's just a pizza guy. But at one point, Fred mentions, and I can't remember what the subject was that it was that he studied, but Fred says, "Well, where'd you learn that?" And Carlo, like, under his breath, is just like, "Harvard." Like, Carlo went to fucking Harvard.
And he's a pizza
right?
Yeah.
Cocaine will do that to you.
And believe me, I live in the Boston area. There are a lot of pizza guys who went to Harvard. Like, everybody went to fucking Harvard. But but the idea that not only is Carlo sort of in Fred's point of view probably should be a Bettina, but he's still less than Carlo because of all the things that Carlo is capable of. But also just, I mean, like, the guy doesn't even want to. He doesn't say, "Oh, I went to Harvard." He just kind of like mumbles it, like, Harvard. Like, like, he doesn't care.
But that's like,
and he's not embarrassed either.
He's not embarrassed. It's just not a thing that's special to him,
It's not a thing of like, I went to Harvard or Oxford or wherever it was. It's like, and now I'm delivering pizza. It's kind of like, it was just real flippant. It's kind of like, that's where I went. Who gives a shit? Right, Let's do the cocaine.
That's like the difference. That's like the difference between somebody who is genuinely funny, though, and then the person you get in a party, she says in her Irish voice, he sits down and says, "I'm so funny," like, it's exactly that, isn't it? Yeah. It's like, people who've got that thing don't go on about that thing. Right. People who don't have it, they feel the lack of it. They feel like they have to compensate for it, so it's more obvious. I don't know if that makes sense, but it does in my head.
I think
I watch a lot of political ads in the United States. It definitely makes sense.
You think you got it bad?
There's a lot of compensation going on in American politics.
The rest of the world is holding its breath for November.
I know. I apologize. For everything. I think it's amazing because Fred is compensating for his feeling of diminishment in the presence of Fanny, and I think that plays out a ton. Fanny does. You mentioned it earlier, Gemma. Fanny does abuse him more than a little bit, right? Because she's dismissive. She's critical in a very curt way. right? I don't think it's cruel. It's just, it's not sugar-coated at all.
She's
right?
very impatient with him. She very much treats him like a kind of annoying kid.
Exactly.
But she also puts up with him because he does kind of fuel her own inner sense of kind of worth, because she can see him and she can see herself, and she knows she's not like him, and she knows she's better. She just intrinsically knows that she's better. Instinctively knows that she's better, and she doesn't. And it's fucking small details, like when Fred's telling his werewolf story. There's this beautiful moment where he uses the wrong word. So he's talking about the werewolf going upstairs, and the werewolf is, he says, the werewolf lurking up the stairs or something. And she corrects him, and she says, lumbers. And that's the better word to use in that sentence, in that context.
She does it a couple of times.
She does it like just picks up on him, and it's like you barely even notice it until after she said it, and then you're like, she's so smart and sharp and clever, and she's just better than Fred. And I think she enjoys being better than him and having someone there to remind herself that she's this way, you know.
It also might play into her being talked down to, because typically within marginalized people, or if you are an underrepresented group in an industry or in a field, you may be so used to someone of Fred's background talking down to you, or at least diminishing exactly what your capabilities are. And so maybe it's a little bit of her saying, like, kind of like with the pizza thing, which is a dead giveaway, where I had to laugh because she asked about the pizzas, like, and he says, "Oh, anything but pineapple." And she says, "Wow, that's kind of a basic white guy answer." And he immediately gets defensive and says, "Oh, you're not one of those. I hate men, feminine," or whatever he says, because immediately he turns into. I could have just seen a red hat like going right on his head at that moment, because she makes a flippant joke about, you know, if she had said, "Oh, don't give me anything with pumpkin spice," it's like, yeah, I would have never figured you for a basic white girl. But you know, it seems like she's dealt with guys like this so much. That
she says it right at the beginning, when she meets him at the beginning, and she puts her notebook down on the side, and he looks at it, and he's fucking hungry for that notebook, and he just said, "Is that full of your $1 million ideas?" And she was like, "Yeah, but I'm not letting you anywhere near this, because I try to keep myself secret from all the average white dudes." And it's just or something along those lines, and it's so sharp because she immediately, like I said before, she gets the measure of him straight away. No, she's not stupid.
Yeah, no, she puts him in. You know, she has no. It's funny because she has no timidity about her. She has no reticence to put him in a place. So she corrects his word usage when he picks a poor word for a thing. She immediately hits him with something that's better. And you can see in his face, like Josh Rubin is so great in this, because you can see in his face that it kind of stings.
Oh my God. There's this amazing, when he starts telling that story to begin with, and she says something like, "Wow." And he's like, "Yeah, it's really good, right?" And she goes, "No, it's awful." And there's this beautiful moment where it's like almost like 20 seconds just on his face. And you just watch him working through all of that, like that anger, and him trying to process it and then get a handle on it. It's beautifully done.
And then later, when she's telling her story and he tries the same thing, she just immediately says, "Don't interrupt me."
Yeah.
Like she puts him right in his place. Like, this is not a thing you're allowed to do. I do this to you. You don't do this to me.
I love that. And I know it's really unfair. And my husband was watching that film with me, and it kind of annoyed him because he's very much a proponent for equality. But I'm like, equality is all well and good when you haven't spent the last 500 years running 500 years behind everyone else. Like, it's just, I did enjoy that, and I shouldn't have. And I did. I took a lot of smug pleasure in her slapping him down.
On that one.
No, I almost cheered, to be honest. Like, I stopped it. I was watching it with my wife. My wife loved this film. She's not a writer, but she, the writers community where I live is fairly big, and she knows a lot of people in the industry. So she gets all of these in jokes, and so she was really enjoying it. But yeah, at that moment where she's like, "Don't interrupt me," I immediately had a flashback to Kamala Harris debating Mike Pence. Like, "I'm talking." Like, "Shut up, Pence, I'm, Mr. Vice President, I'm talking. And then this thing which happens all the time, on panels at cons, which is that you get a token woman on a panel and 4 dudes around her, and they all just run over her, and she never gets to have a word in for the entire hour because no one will let her speak. And it was such a wonderful moment to see her take control of her voice and her ability to be heard, even though it's just with Fred.
But it's not just with the things she says; it's the things she does as well. And another kind of moment where I sort of fist pumped. Fred can't light the fire in the cabin when she first turns up, and like within 20 seconds she's lit the fire and it just goes and she's like, yeah, man. And I am the fire lighter in my family. Like if we go camping, I'm the one that does all that shit, and I'm the one that like does all the DIY in the house and builds all the furniture, and I'm the kind of practical one. And I really enjoyed seeing that in a film as well. Like there are a lot of strong female characters in movies these days, which I appreciate much more, and in literature and stuff. Not too many of them are represented being practical still. Like, it's just something that screenwriters don't think about. Like, could a woman light a fire or fucking hang a picture straight, Like, yes, right. Yes, we can. Yeah, can we have more of this, please?
They're strong in a very particular way, right? Which is a very masculine way. Like, you see them fighting, and you see them, doing something amazingly specifically,
do you know what I think that is? Difficult. I think that's a guide idea of what a strong woman is. Does that make sense?
I think you're absolutely right. And they don't show them just being competent, right? Because real strength is competence, is that ability to light a fire without hemming and hawing about it, and just having the knowledge to do it reflexively, right? And it's not about gun battles. It's about being able to live your life. Like, shit, I had to have my wife show me how to use the smoker yesterday because I wanted to smoke a thing, but she's the one that loves that.
Can I tell you my man cooks meat story, which is like my favorite anecdote. So we bought a new barbecue a couple of summers back. My husband's going to hate me for this. And he likes to kind of do the whole cooking meat thing, and why not? And so we decided one day to have a barbecue, and he lit the barbecue, and nothing really much happened, which is fine. Maybe the lump was a bit damp because it'd been in the shed, whatever. So we waited, and I kept out of his way, and I could hear him getting increasingly frustrated. And it was an hour passed, and the barbecue still hadn't lit. He was being really determined about this. I think after about 10 minutes, I would have noticed this thing wasn't quite right. And I noticed the fire lighter fluid was coming out, and like I'm surprised he didn't siphon petrol off from the tank of the car. Just tried all these things over a period of like an hour to like almost an hour and a half by the time I went over to him, and he was kind of apoplectic with rage because the barbecue wouldn't light. And I looked down at the coals in the barbecue, and I was like, "Where did you buy those from?" And he said, "I just bought them up the road from the garage." And they were coals that you put into gas fireplaces that are flame retardant.
They my gosh!
Specifically manufactured to not burn.
That is the most amazing thing I've ever heard.
Hadn't noticed. So he'd been trying to light something that was designed to not like burst into fire for an hour and a half, and it was just a really good example. I was like, I think we need to pop back to the shop, my darling, and get some lumpwood charcoal.
but I mean, if he had pulled it off, look how amazing it would be.
That would be a man fire story. Like, I burned the unburnable.
That's right.
I love telling that story.
That's a great story. But I mean, it's funny because it's such a great story. Yeah, no, it was the thing. It was like, I don't know how to use the smoker because it's too technical. But my wife, she just goes out and she's like, oh yeah, you turn it here, you start this process, you do the thing, and then you come back to it. And I'm like, okay.
There is something really competency and feminism. I guess feminism is the right word. We've still got a way to go, and I think that's again why this movie resonated with me so much, because here's this woman, she's professionally competent, she's kind of socially adept, She's practical. She's able to defend herself, which we see later on. She's quick. She's smart. She's kind of the real fucking deal, and I love that in a female character. Like, to see that on screen, we just need more of that. Like, it's not all about how well you wear a costume. It's about the little things, and I loved it. It just made me feel seen a little bit, I think.
And that's why I think. I think you put it in perfect perspective. That's why her character, even though she seems very unlikable and she's kind of mean to Fred, and I don't want to say she's unlikable because she's eminently likable, but she has these sort of little things that she pings him with, and you get the sense that she's messing with him. But it couldn't be any other way, because if she was some sort of frail, wilting, typical Hollywood woman, right? Female character. Yeah. I don't think the story would work as well.
But it's interesting.
She has to be this competent, strong person.
I think it's interesting that you say she's likable, because I would put good money on the fact that an awful lot of people out there won't like her as a character.
I guarantee some people hated her. Yeah.
I've had this a lot with the characters that I write. I write a lot of women in books about women, and I think one of the most consistent criticisms of my work, particularly with my book White Pines, was that the main character wasn't very likable. And it's like, well, fuck you. They don't need to be likable. I liked her. So bad it to me.
Oh yeah, no, that's a pet peeve of mine. Because I do the same thing. I write characters who are in distress. Right. Mm-hmm. And people who are in distress don't always behave their best. And so,
you don't see the best side of somebody when they're running away from death.
No, you never do. I mean, shit, you don't see I used to be, I said earlier, I used to be a lawyer. You don't see the best side of people when they're buying a house, right? Because they're so stressed out about money and about signing papers and all this stuff. Yeah. And they act like the nicest people act like monsters. Mm-hmm. Leading up to just buying a house, and so stressful situations make people, or not make people, but reveal people sort of, kind of at their worst a lot of the time. And so, yeah, who cares if you like her? I thought she was a great character, but I guarantee, I really liked her. Like, I want to be friends with her.
Yeah, me too. I want her sweater more than anything else. I just want that sweater. And
I was waiting for the sweater to come up.
Oh my God. And I went on to like every social media platform that I'm on and just said, somebody find me this. And somebody did. And it's really expensive, but I'm going to buy it for Christmas. I'm going to treat
That's amazing.
Nice. But yeah, no, I guarantee if I were to scroll through the 1-star reviews on IMDb right here, I'm sure that I'd find a ton talking about what an amazing bitch she is. And it's like, well,
yeah. But I think again, also that's an age thing too. And I wonder whether that's tied in with the people that didn't enjoy the movie because it didn't deliver quite what they expected. Whether it's like what you said earlier about this film is written for us, yeah, and it's written for our age group as well. And it just. Again, I think I'm the same age as Aya Cash. I know I am because I stalked her on IMDb. Because I love
you are so delightful that you just lumped me into your age group, and I appreciate it so much.
I don't know how old everyone else is, but it's just like
we're all as old as you think we are.
Well, it's because like we're not 18. You know what I mean? We're not.
Oh,
yeah. And that's very dismissive of. I don't mean to be dismissive of people who are not slightly older. It's more that there are people do tend to respond to different things at different stages in their life. There we go. That was very diplomatic, wasn't it?
Well, it also goes with the life experience and what's taken place, in all of our lives in the 80s and the 90s and early 2000s, as far as what we saw when we were coming of age and in our early adulthood.
Right. Well, yeah, culture changes, and culture influences who you are to a large degree, and the best of us change along with culture, right? We're able to move with it, but a lot of people don't, right? A lot of people are stuck in the era that they came up in. And so if you grew up in the 80s, like I did, because I'm incredibly old, you might be in a place where, where the values of the 80s sort of still resound in your head. And I think this is, part of the problem with modern culture is that millennials and younger people people in their 30s and their 20s, don't have the same values. They have different values. They have, in a lot of cases, better values, right? Because they've learned from the mistakes that prior generations have made, and there's a lot of defensiveness about being asked to change when you've always been this way, and it was the culture that made you this way, right? So yeah, I definitely see sort of a cultural thing in Fanny, which is that she's a very confident, self-possessed, young woman who in the 80s, this character would not exist.
Well, like the only thing I was trying to think of another movie where there was a female author, and the only thing I could come up with was Romancing the Stone.
God damn it. I was thinking the same thing.
Which says a lot about women writers and kind of the media, I guess, and how they're represented. Right. But like that whole
played that character too, right? Because
it's just like, who would you rather be? Like, I know who I would rather be. And I think that's yeah.
Right.
I know which one my bank account would prefer I was too. Hey, I want to go back to what you said about Fanny being a bitch to some of these 1-star review people.
Right.
I was thinking about this, and I framed it with one of my favorite male writers in literary form, not a real person, Paul Sheldon. Paul Sheldon from Misery lives in the cabin across the street from Fred. Does this shit go down the same? And do we feel the same way about Paul? Is Paul a bitch to him?
Hell no. I think Paul
but would the 1-star reviews say, Paul's such a whiny asshole. I hated him so much.
Maybe we're programmed to sympathize automatically with the lead guy. Does that make sense?
No, I think we are. Yeah.
It does, but I'm looking at this as Paul Sheldon suffers from extreme hubris. He does exactly what Fred's doing, right? Like he always goes to this one place to write, and he has this routine, right? And so I think if his thing was going to this cabin and he met Fred and they got together during this power outage and we had the same movie we have now, I don't think that these 1-star reviewers call Paul a bitch a single time.
Nope.
I think it's just perfectly fine that he's an asshole because he's the older writer with experience.
Right. He's the older male writer with experience, and he stands in a place to be a mentor to Fred, where Fanny, who also stands in a place to be a mentor to Fred, wouldn't ever be considered one by the kind of guy who thinks that her confidence is bitchiness. Right.
Well, that goes a long way towards explaining why she is spiky as well and sarcastic. And she's got and I have to admit, I have a social media persona, which is like 90% shit jokes, just because I feel like
I love your jokes.
Then I wish I could claim they were original, but like it's something that I've had to cultivate to almost to be taken seriously, and if that makes sense, like that I'm not soft and that I'm not kind of, I guess, feminine in that way in how I communicate myself to other industry professionals. I'm very direct, and I try and be humorous wherever possible, and I use sarcasm where it's appropriate, and I can be a little bit spiky and standoffish as well at times when I need to be, as a kind of self-preservation thing, because otherwise you will get trampled on a bit, and I've experienced that a lot, and I've learned very, very quickly as well the right balance of kind of confidence and humor, plus a little bit of like British self-effacing, we can't take ourselves too seriously stuff, which so like that blend seems to work for me, but it's like a recipe I've had to kind of refine over 2 years. Does that make sense? And it explains a lot about like why she is the way she is, but she's also now at a level of success where she doesn't have to give a fuck as much. She can just perhaps be more of herself. And she's also comes across as someone who's really tired of the bullshit, which again, I really empathize with.
I mean, you think about this character is a person who's had a major bestseller, award-winning novel, that was a cultural touchstone. She was on NPR. The pizza guy knows who she is, right? Like, she's well known. And you think, what did she have to go through to get there?
Yeah.
Right?
I don't know what NPR is, by the way.
Oh, it's National Public Radio. It's an intelligent American media outlet as opposed to all of our other stupid ones.
Right.
But yeah, it's a thing. Like, NPR almost never would ever interview a horror author. I have a couple of friends that they have interviewed because they're superlative writers, like Silvia Moreno-Garcia and Paul Tremblay have both been on NPR, but they tend to be loftier, and they don't like to talk to genre writers as much as they like to talk to literary ones.
Unless it's Halloween, and then
unless it's Halloween,
game.
Yeah. But the idea that Fanny was on NPR, is something like she's really made it.
Okay, so she's the serious stuff, yeah.
Exactly, and there's a sort of hinted at backstory there. Right, which is, what was she like before this? Because this is a breakout book.
Well,
right?
I think the fact that she is so protective of her ideas and her IP and her notebook, I think that speaks to somebody having stolen something from her in the past as well. And it's never said, but it's implied really, really heavily that somebody at some point has stolen one of her ideas. And I think that's
funny. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no. I think that was it pretty much. I think that's just very telling that she's so savvy about not giving anything of herself away that somebody else could steal.
Yeah, and it's interesting because that's the only part of the film that I felt didn't ring true for me.
Well, right? I can tell you firsthand that I didn't think about that, and yeah.
I mean, I've had a conversation with James before and other people in my field and things where I've taken myself to, at least I've given people notice, don't volunteer me for projects. Don't ask the news to contact me for anything, because there was a local news station that took all of my information from some interviews that I had with one of their people and gave me, I don't even think they gave me any credit as being the source. They included me as far as like the news feature. But basically everything I had said as far as the information, the stories, all that stuff that had been out there, like they took and used it as like the intro and on the article. And then there's like a 5-second little splice of me saying something. I'm like, you guys, like,
yeah, that's terrible.
You took everything.
That's shitty.
It's like that joke, right? There's an amazing joke, which is I invented a new word, plagiarism. And it's just like, it's something that as a new writer, it doesn't even cross your mind for a million years that somebody would want to take your idea. And that comes across again with Bettina, where she's in the car and she's so enthusiastic to tell Fred about her idea. And then the fucker goes off and Googles it later on, and he's genuinely considering stealing it, which is why the payoff at the very end is so glorious and well earned.
I want to comment on that really fast. That's like one of my favorite parts. I rewatched it today. So this was the second time I saw it. And I didn't even notice this the first time through, but this time it totally jumped at me. When he Googles it, he puts Cora and he spells it wrong. And Google says, did you mean... and spells it correctly. So it's one more fucking thing he can't do right.
Even Bettina, who's this really awkward person, has more sort of cultural knowledge than Fred does. Yeah.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
And actually, well, I mean, when it gets down to it at the end, like to jump ahead to the spoiler where she's taken Fanny's ideas, and it's one thing to steal a notebook, and it's another thing to take an idea and make a fucking success out of it. And she's a big success. She's done really well. So she's obviously really smart and a good writer, which is another lovely layer at the end. Because you judge a book by its cover, right? You judge her by the fact that she's dowdy and her teeth aren't very clean and she's awkward and socially kind of annoying. But she's obviously fucking smart. You know, the idea was smart.
There is a thing that you're absolutely right, and it didn't occur to me until you said it, which is that Bettina doesn't steal a finished manuscript.
Nope.
Bettina just steals a notebook filled with ideas.
That's all it is.
And she has the wherewithal into a successful book.
Exactly, to sit down, do the work. And so, like, I get passionate about this. Because do the work. So for me, If you had to tell me one reason why this has shot up to like one of my top 5 favorite movies, I think, of this year, if not like the last 10 years, it's that one scene where towards the end, just before things start to turn dark and nasty, and Fanny she's had enough of Fred's shit. She's had enough of him feeling sorry for himself. She's had enough of the fact that he's jealous of her. And she turns around to him, and it's fucking emblazoned in my mind, this scene. It's beautiful. And I was fucking roaring at the TV when I watched it. And she basically says to Fred, if you want to be a success, you just have to do the work. And she says, do the work, do the work, do the work, like over and over again. Yeah. And I cannot tell you how powerful that sentiment is. Like, you can have all the ideas in the world. You can have a healthy imagination. You can have all the desire and longing. Unless you get your ass on that fucking day in, day out, and you work, you aren't going anywhere with that unless you're lucky or you're connected. And who gives a fuck about those people? Like,
no. But even the most connected have to do the work.
Not easy to write a book. It is just, it's not the most difficult thing in the world. It's not brain surgery. We're not on the front line and kind of a war zone or anything, but it is a difficult job.
No, none of us are heroes, but it's difficult to finish a book. It's easy to start one, I think. And it's, it's doing the work, but it's also understanding that the work is more than just, writing Once Upon a Time and then writing the end, right? I'm in the process right now of finishing up this book with Houghton Mifflin, and the thing that they don't tell you when you publish with bigger publishers is that you're going to have to read your book 1 billion times.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right? Is that I wrote it, I rewrote it, I sent it to my agent. He gave me notes. I rewrote it. I read it again. I sent it to him. We sold it. Then the editor gets involved, right? Yeah. And now I have to reread it again, edit it again, do the thing. Once they typeset it, they're going to send it to me again to make sure that there are no typos in the, in the manuscript, because the process of typesetting creates typos, right? And it's like at this point, I love this book, but I hate this fucking book. Yep. Right. I don't ever want to read this book again.
Ever again.
Right? Yeah. And then of course the thing that happens is when it comes out next summer, I'm gonna be doing appearances and events, and I'm gonna have to read from the fucking book. Right. And you just constantly, like, you spend 3 years reading a book that you write, and people just want to dash it off and be done and move on to the next thing. And I guess that's great if you're able to do that, but the work is work. It's not, it's not a holiday.
Well, that I like with self-publishing is you do all of that yourself. You are your own editor. You are your own agent. So, and like, if you're somebody, I think for me personally, I'm an extremely kind of anally retentive writer. And one misplaced full stop distresses me for years, and so I'm very, very hard on myself in that sense. And it's different work. It's quicker work. It's more immediate work because there are so many people in the chain. But it's a level of graft that I think I've always been a hard worker in my entire life. But it's a level of graft I never really appreciated. And when you create something and you're responsible for it, and then you put it out into the world, you care about it so much. And again, I think that's the thing with Fred and Fanny as well, is like, if Fred really cared about this shit, he'd have done it by now, And she cares about it. The fact that she's so good at it means she cares about it, and she's taken the time to get good at something.
Right. He's trying to get there. This is the thing. This is why self-publishing terrifies me. I wouldn't self-publish. I did. I self-published a book, but it had already been published previously by another publisher, so it had gone through all of that process. But I don't want to be the one that's solely responsible for everything. So when that full stop is missing, right, that's not my fault. I can blame it on the associate editor.
But there's an amazing amount of creative freedom in it as well.
There is.
Definitely. So Dear Laura was the award-nominated book, and I don't think there was a single agent or publisher who would have looked twice at it, because it comes in at 25,000 words.
Sure. It's not marketable length.
It didn't need to be any longer than that, but literary agents often have a thing about word counts and marketability, and it didn't fit into a particular niche. None of my other books really fit into any kind of one genre. They're very fluid. And
if I said something, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. So like the the creative freedom to just go, who fucking cares? I wrote this book and I like it, and hit publish. It's brilliant, and that's why I do it. Like,
if I send something to my agent, it's got to be marketable length. It's got to be a marketable topic, right? And, I started. It's funny. Several years ago, I decided I wanted to write an exploitation revenge novel set in Mexico that revolved around a women's health clinic, and I titled it Abortionistas.
Ooh.
And I'm like, okay, we're going to do this. And then, but there's no way I can publish it now because my agent would just be like, fuck you. Are you trying to destroy your career? Like, what are you doing? And it was, it was meant to be sort of like a feminist takedown of conservative, politics and border politics between the US and Mexico. But, even that title wouldn't survive.
I don't know. I've seen, and this is, again, I think I wouldn't underestimate your readers and the indie community as well. Like, if you do it well, then
I think I would have to do it indie, right?
You would have to, yeah.
Because Houghton Mifflin or Macmillan are never going to touch Abortionistas.
I think this is being mirrored with streaming services, though, and particularly with streaming services like Shudder. So, like, using Host is a really good example. Jed Shepard, who's the co-writer, I think, and director or co-writer.
He wrote it, and he was on the show. So go check out our episode on that after this.
He kind of said something on Twitter not so long ago about the fact that Host comes in under an hour, just under an hour long. If it had been any longer, it wouldn't have worked. It would have just been drawn out and shit, and not shit. It would have been not as good. And
it would have slumped, right?
It would have slumped. It would have been a bit of a chore as well because you can't actually physically cope with that many jump scares in a longer period of time.
So good. Into my next question.
I was exhausted. I was exhausted by the end of that film. But like the idea that with a streaming service like Shudder, you have much more creative freedom. That feels very much like the indie publishing space to me as well. And I think that's why movies like Scare Me are also able to kind of flourish and survive and thrive, is because the rules are kind of changing continuously away from these big organizations and corporate
you can be more daring in a smaller thing. I mean, that's what happened with me. I published a book called Come to Dust, and it was after my book with Tor, and I sent it to my editor at Tor. I said, here's my next book, are you interested? And they passed. They were like a hard pass because it's about dead children coming back to life. And nobody wanted to touch it because they didn't want to have a part with dead kids. So I ended up taking it to Journal Stone, right, which is a smaller press, and they were all over it. They were ready to just run with it because the editor and the owner of the press, saw that the story was good, and they were willing to take a chance with. With this idea,
it's story, isn't it? Not niche, not
exactly.
demographic.
And they didn't have to look at what's the New York Times going to say about this book? Are they going to call us? It's funny because it's a story about Jack Ketchum's first book, Off Season, right? Which is that it was bought by Ballantine Books. And they were going to do a full court. Another sports metaphor I know. Full court press. I have no idea what it means, but it sounds really exciting. But they were going to do this big launch with this book and do a huge print run and end caps and standees and all of this stuff. And then they sent it to the Village Voice to be reviewed, and the Village Voice shamed them and said, "This is violent pornography. You ought to be ashamed of having." Bought this book, Ballantine Press, and they totally backed off of it, and they cut the print run. They canceled all of the promo and everything, and his real name was Dallas. Dallas's career kind of never, was what it should have been, which is he should have been like the next Stephen King, right? He was that good a writer.
Yep.
But because this one outlet. Really took them to task for publishing a book about cannibalism, and so I can see where Macmillan Tor would be hesitant to publish a book about a bunch of dead kids coming back to life, but yeah. So the smaller press allowed me to be to publish this sort of more daring book. I don't even know that it's that daring. Like, it was already done by, Stephen King had a bestseller with Pet Sematary. It's not like it's really transgressing.
I like the way that the horror movie space and the book space is going at the moment, and it feels like it's, like you say, it's going back to kind of more grungy roots.
Yeah, no, some of the absolute best work I've seen come lately is major published. Like Stephen Graham Jones' new novel is phenomenal, but at the exact same time, there are books that are every bit as good that are coming from self-published authors and from small press authors, and just dismissing something because it's not coming from Simon and Schuster is a mistake.
But then there's that dilemma with so this again kind of goes back to the movie. Like, I'm comfortable in the indie space and I'm happy with the creative freedom, but I want to be Fanny. I want to have the big book, and I want to be on the intellectual radio shows.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
And to get the paycheck and to get the advances, and if there's a way in which in the future I can do both, then I'll be happy. And I think that's a lot of people are moving that way, kind of hybrid publishing careers where they explore themselves in an indie space, but kind of pay the bills in a more traditional sense.
I remember seeing an interview with Brendan Fraser. He had just done a new George of the Jungle movie.
I love that movie.
which was absolute garbage, but
I love that movie.
Yeah. But right before that, he had done an art film with Ian McKellen called Gods and Monsters, which was
that's a really good film.
Yeah, biopic about James Whale and about James Whale's sexuality, about him being a gay man in Hollywood, an open gay man in Hollywood, and all of this stuff. And they asked him, they're like, oh, look, Brendan, you can really act. Like, Gods and Monsters was an amazing film. Why do you do George of the Jungle? And his answer was, George of the Jungle pays the bills and allows me to do Gods and Monsters.
But also Crash, the movie Crash, not the Cronenberg movie about having sex with car crash victims, but the other one.
I love that movie.
Which is a good film, but there's another one with it's an ensemble cast and it has Tandy Newton.
LA film,
yeah, and he is just towering in that. And like his film career kind of is one of those unfortunately blighted by sexual assault, I think it was, wasn't it? And he retreated from kind of everything because he was assaulted essentially. Which is a terrible, terrible thing. And again, that I mean, it's quite interesting, isn't it? Because we in a kind of is it Weinberg? I'm so tired. Weinstein kind of arsehole, whatever his name is, kind of in the aftermath of all of that, we tend to associate that kind of thing as being with a woman, but actually that's not always the case as well. And again,
Terry
I think
Crews talks about being sexually.
Terry Crews has been really open about it as well, and he's this big fucking guy, big strapping guy, and it's horrendous. But it shows that the industry, I think, itself is very fragile. Does that make sense? Like when we were talking earlier on about men writing what they think of as strong women, women still like being more represented now than they were, but not in a particularly realistic way. Like not being able to kind of come forward with these more challenging ideas because they're not acceptable in a kind of marketable way. There's still a lot of work to be done, there's a lot. And I feel like back in the days when HBO were kind of commissioning really strong new stuff, I feel like kind of Netflix and Shudder and people like that have taken on that mantle a bit, and I'm interested to see where it goes. So things like the Candyman remake, which is just a complete social commentary. I'm so excited for that film. The trailer, I melted on the spot watching the trailer for that. It was so powerful, and particularly in the context of like the Black Lives Matter movement and everything going on at the moment. I feel like we're on the crest of a bit of a wave with movies and with horror in general, just I think coming into itself.
Yeah, this is a great time to be a fan because, it's because a whole bunch of fresh voices that haven't been given a loud megaphone in Hollywood are getting a shot right now, right? Like Candyman, and I got to look it up because I can't remember because it's not Ava DuVernay. It's the director of Candyman is a black woman.
Nia DaCosta.
That's right. Thank you, Nia DaCosta. you know, and you even talk about like, you know, Get Out or you know, these other movies that are being released by people who wouldn't have had a shot in Hollywood, you know, in the 90s.
Things like
right?
the Spanish version of, or the Spanish speaking version, Spanish language version of La Lorena, rather than the kind of Hollywood insipid version. And just diversity goes back to in most of this goes back to diversity. And again, I think Scare Me is a really nice example of diversity just done in a way you don't even notice, which is how it should be.
Yeah, because it's written, directed, and starred in by a white guy.
Yeah, which is my only slight issue with the film, is I do kind of wish it'd been written by a woman. Like, just but if we're gonna have a movement of guys writing women really fucking well, then I'm all for it.
We are going to talk about how a female producer changed it and made it what it is.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Do you want to go there now? I didn't mean to totally kill this. Sorry.
Let's do it. Yeah.
All right. So a couple things really fast. I just want to go back to what you guys were. I'll get there in just a second. I just had a couple notes here, but I didn't want to interrupt you guys. When we were talking about length, like Host, I want to see so much more stuff like that, because it's the same reason that I love novellas. And we talked about this with John F. D. Taft when he was on the show. You got to serve the story. And I'm so sick of, it has to be 90 minutes. It has to be this. It has to have this word count. Fuck all of that. If you can tell me a 3,000 word story that rocks my life harder than a 100,000 story, great. Look how much time I just saved.
Well, I always I use the example of the yellow wallpaper. It's like one of the most defining books of our genre.
Yes.
And it's a tiny little thing, and it's perfect. It's literally perfect, that story, in every way. It's short and it's sharp and it's shocking and it's deep and it's tragic, and if it was any longer, it would be a kind of a drag, you know?
Yeah. And so you have Host, which does the same thing, right? Like, it's the 50 minutes and it's done. And I think that we're going to get more of that with streaming services. And I love it, because I look at Netflix, and Netflix can have a TV show where the times don't line up. One episode's 20 minutes longer because that's what serves the story.
That's what needs.
And I think it's so cool that streaming is doing that. And that's what I view indie books as doing. Like, Bracken, you were talking about, you know, it's got to be marketable and it's got to be this word count and it's got to have this. I think indie just kind of went, fuck you. It's about the story. And again, I go back to punk rock and how many songs are 2.5 minutes long instead of 5, you know? Yeah. And it's that same thing. It's what serves that emotion. And I'm going to be the first to say that I think Scare Me suffers from this. And I think if you cut 10 minutes out of Scare Me, it's tighter and it hits even harder. I feel like it's slightly too long. I would cut the Broadway song.
Oh, I knew you were going to say that. And I think the Broadway song is fucking perfect. And I love it. And I knew you were going to say that.
I would leave it. I would leave a piece of it. I wouldn't do the whole thing.
Oh, come on. It's hilarious.
Musicals. I don't like singing in movies. I loved that song.
So did I.
Every single second of it.
But when you ask me, I don't mean I hate it. I just mean it's the thing I think you can cut and not injure the film.
Tighten the story. Yeah. I mean, possibly. I think it really wonderfully reflects the level of sort of intellectual creativity they're existing in that moment, which is that it's the one moment in the film where the entire cabin disappears.
I think that's exactly why you can't cut it as well.
And they're wholly in their imaginations.
Yeah, no, right? Like a crescendo. That's like the crescendo. That's like the fucking peak of their joint creativity and imagination.
That's exactly it. That's the point where they reach the just like you just said, Gemma. You're absolutely right. They reach the peak of their creativity in that moment, and I wouldn't cut it. But
okay. I will give you that and change my answer. You ready? No. I would kill Jack Torrance shit at the beginning, because I think you can show him being bored, not writing, way faster.
But that's not what that's doing. That's not about him being bored. That's about him being a psychopath who chases after women with sharp knives.
Exactly, but that's what's leading into what we're going to talk about in a second. Because I think that it tips the hat too much to him being psycho, which is what the original script did. The original script had him go full killer mode instead of leaving it ambiguous. So I killed this to make more ambiguity and cut time and make it faster. Then this leads into the end, right? So what happened was he takes the script to Alex Bach. I don't know if I'm saying her name correctly. She's a producer. Mm-hmm. She reads it and she goes, "Don't make him fully psycho. Leave it really ambiguous." And her reasoning was, when you're trapped in a kitchen with a man and he's had too much to drink, you don't know if he's horsing around or if he's a legitimate threat.
Right.
And that's what this scene became. The ambiguity of, is he fucking around? Is he really trying to kill her? And I think if you take that Jack Torrance scene out of the beginning, we get more ambiguity.
I agree.
Yeah, sorry.
No, go ahead.
No. Go.
I agree to a degree that I think it does sort of paint him early in the picture as, it's a little on the nose, is what I would say, right? It's not necessarily too heavy-handed, but it's just kind of like, oh, look, he's pretending to be a psycho because maybe he's a psycho. At the same time, I'm not crazy about the Jack Torrance stuff at the beginning because I think it's so... Well, I'm sorry, I have to rephrase that. I do like the Jack Torrance stuff at the beginning to the extent that it shows the limits of his creativity, which is that as a writer, his entire sort of inner monologue is cinematic. Now, that's not to say that cinema isn't important in literature, because I think it absolutely is, right? And that as a modern writer, you can't talk about story and tension and narrative and all of these things without mentioning cinema. But when he goes to his well to try to find an idea, his well is populated with cinema instead of literature.
I also think, I think it shows his love of the genre. I think it shows the reason he wants to be a horror writer is because he does genuinely love horror. And you see that when Fanny turns up and do they mimic, is it Creepshow?
Yes. Oh no, Tales from the Crypt.
Tales from the Crypt, sorry. And the kind of the guy, the voiceover, they kind of go off into this lovely riff together about it. And I just took that to be an extension of that. Like, he's a bit of a nerd. Horror nerd.
A wonderful shared moment with the Crypt Keeper. Yeah.
Yeah. And I thought
also a nice nod to anthologies.
Yes, right. Which ties it back.
That's what we're doing, even though we're not.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But as a female, the idea of being alone in a kitchen with a guy that's drunk too much and not knowing whether, so that's that pivotal scene where he turns and he tells her to run, and you're really not sure whether to take him seriously or not. But I watched that, and I was kind of clenched internally because, I mean, like, not to sort of dwell on it or get too serious, but I've been mugged. I've been attacked by two men in the past, so I've had direct experience of male violence. And you're, as a female, your flags go up a lot when you're walking anywhere and you turn around and you see a guy who's walking close behind you, or if you see a group of people coming towards you the other way, and there's just a million and one different scenarios in which you're very, very aware of your own vulnerability. Some people perhaps more so than others, and there is that moment of recognition in Fanny's eyes where she suddenly, it tips, and it comes out of the most absurd thing as well. She's just been to the toilet to have like a giant dump, and it's just really like brash and weird, and then it becomes about like her kind of giving him a lecture because she thinks he's a lazy arsehole, which he kind of is. And then it just turns so quickly to become something quite dark and violent and frightening, and she becomes really, really aware of her own vulnerability, and you see it in her face. And it was so well handled because it wasn't the traditional Jack Torrance bashing down the door with an axe. It was like, is he serious? Is he not? But he is fucking serious because he wants to. It's not overly clear whether he wants to kill her, but he certainly wants her to run away from him, and he certainly wants to exert control over her.
Yeah, he wants her to be in fear of him. And that's the thing. It's funny. The whole concept of the film is tell me a story that will scare me. But at that moment, he's telling her a story. But it's not the story that's scary, right? It's all of his body language, and it's his intentionality and his unexpressed physicality that's scaring her. And it's such a wonderful embodiment of the idea that Gavin de Becker wrote in The Gift of Fear, and Margaret Atwood echoed later, which was that men are afraid women will laugh at them. Women are afraid that men will kill them.
Yeah.
Right. And this is the moment where, he's experienced, in that formulation of the dynamic, he's experienced a man's worst fear, that this woman will laugh at him and see him as less than. And she is standing in abject fear of his potential for basically physical violence. And at this point, she knows that there's a restraining order against him, right? Yeah. That he has problems with women and with his behavior and his ability to control his behavior. And so, he's realized the fear that women will laugh at him, and she's realizing the fear that he may kill her.
And it's powerful. It's powerful stuff because when she does when that twigs and she does run away, it's sort of you almost can't like countenance what you're actually seeing, because this funny, light-hearted movie with a fucking massive Broadway number in the middle of it has suddenly turned into this horrible, oh my God. And then you the sense of kind of peril, and like you care about these characters as well, which is what makes it so clever. You care about them. And I was kind of bummed when Fred kind of meets his grisly end at the end. It was like I wanted a better redemptive arc for him, but also it felt right because he was the bad guy. He was a toxic fucking guy. But then also to have it so cleverly handled where she runs away and she just leaves him. She's too afraid to kind of help him. She's too afraid to finish him off, which he asks for.
So, what was your take on that moment where he asks her to finish him off, as opposed to asking her to call for an ambulance?
Yeah, so I think that was the only moment for me that I think perhaps didn't work so well, was why didn't he just ask her to call an ambulance? But maybe he thought he was so mortally wounded. Maybe he was in so much pain. I'm not sure that worked for me. I mean, it worked the way it played, because I liked the idea that she grabs the log and she's going to bash him. Yeah.
Right. And then she doesn't. She decides not to. And it's a wonderful moment because it forces him to live with his choices.
Yep.
Right. Instead of her fixing things for him. But at the same time, I still feel like his inclination would have been more like, call for help.
Yeah, I mean, it maybe could have been a scenario where he asked her for help, and then she was so frightened of him that she wanted to kind of finish him off, and then decides not to. Well,
so this is the way that the Bracken MacLeod version of this story goes. If I wrote it, right, it goes. He gets impaled on the fireplace poker, and he asks her to call for help. And she sees this as a moment to have power, and she refuses to give him help. As she murders him more or less by choosing to do nothing, like choosing to leave. And so it explores some of her darkness as a horror writer. But because I don't want her at the end of the story, I don't want her to be cowardly. Mm-hmm. I want her to be that have the same competency that she has at the beginning.
All right. But here's the James Sabata version.
Okay.
She makes it out of the house. He falls down the stairs and stabs himself and dies, because I don't like that he talks after this. And then she's outside trying to get like a cell phone service or anything, right? And instead she sees this log and she makes the active choice to fight back and goes in, and that's where we get the reveal that he's dead.
Oh, that would have been cool too.
I'm okay with him speaking because of what he's saying and the realization that he's finally come to. The guy's a fuck up. I mean, he's a monster, as his ex describes him. He's harassed her, probably been violent with her, because I think it's a lot more than him saying, I'll kill you, because he even jokes about it. He's like, you know how people are. He's just like, I'll kill you. You know, it doesn't mean anything. Because I think it's an issue of he's been rejected in so many different ways, probably rejected in his professional career, rejected within his own self-doubt as far as being able to do this. You have someone much younger than you who's successful at it, and you can't see how it works, because he resents her so much, because he states like, oh, well, you're just living your dream. Not, you know, she fucking worked hard and wrote her stuff
right.
and did all the stuff that she just living her dream. And I think for him is that realization that even when he's trying to scare her or even possibly kill her, he can't even do that. So it's kind of like it's kind of like when Wile E. Coyote gets the whatever the fuck, the Roadrunner, because there were complaints about you keep chasing this thing, and because they started getting mail and complaints about you chase him, and you never catch him. So they shot a version where he catches the Roadrunner and holds up a sign and says, "Okay, now what?" Yep. And I think that was his realization. Like,
yeah, nobody who watches, you know, those cartoons, who watches Merry Melodies, wants to see a Wile E. Coyote catch the Roadrunner, because you know what it fucking means is that he eats it.
Right.
And so it becomes a horror story instead of a comedy. You wouldn't change the end, would you?
I'm not sure I would, although it didn't sit too well with me that she ran away, I have to admit.
It would be, to be honest, if I were in that situation, I would probably do exactly what she did.
I think I would as well. I think maybe the kind of feminist in me wanted her to own it a little more, to kind of be okay with the fact that he brought this on himself and that he deserved it. And but she was very frightened, and it was very realistic in that sense as well. And it goes back to kind of not contradicting myself about writing realistic women. So I'm not sure I would change it. No, I think it worked pretty well the way it was. Maybe make him suffer slightly more. A quick end, bit of a quick death. Like
take out his knee so that we have that callback to the beginning.
Or at least
he had knock him once. Yeah, knock him once with the piece of wood, but not kill him, and then decide that
like really pop an eyeball out or something. Yeah, or at least he's got like really bad splinters on the way down.
Give him a nice concussion. Like, oh, that really fucking hurts, and then she's like, oh, sorry, that's the best I can do.
Yeah. She pulls out a copy of Venus and gives him some paper cuts.
Oh, I like the idea that she kind of leaves a copy on his lap though, and that she walks off. That would
here's something to pass the time.
Yeah. See, that would work. Yeah, I like that.
Before we get too far away from this, Don, I know you desperately wanted to talk about the fire poker, so walk me through it.
Oh well, when the fire poker was first grabbed, I envisioned my sophomore English class, the professor I had, where she explicitly stated, anytime someone's holding someone, it's a phallic. Anytime anyone's holding something, it's a phallic symbol. And everybody in the class, because we're all like 18, 19 years old, we're kind of like, oh my gosh, she's talking about penises. And she finally, she finally said, like, I'm gonna tell you the way this is, because we were reading Madame Bovary at one point. She pointed to everything in the book that she could find. She's like, penis, 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 penis. That's a penis. That's a penis. That's a penis. So whenever I see these competing things between a male and a female character, and one has control over an object and the other person gets that control of the object, that phallic symbol comes back again, as far as like the fire poker is there, because it's not necessarily threatening unless you're holding it a certain way, or if you're pointing at someone. Otherwise, it's just a tool to reset logs or poke at the coals. There's really nothing to it. But the whole idea that she's holding it, he's holding it at one point, and of course, when he's holding it to threaten her, there's that idea of, what kind of violence is he going to enact upon her? Is it going to be physical, psychological, sexual? Even when I was watching, I'm like, I don't know what's in her head because I've never been in that situation. But I have had those conversations with friends, relatives, where they talk about, whatever their experience was, where a man happened to be there, and it was very uncomfortable because even if it was someone they knew, someone they worked with, it could go from friendly, casual relationship to a threatening situation at the drop of a hat. And that's what you have here is where, they were joking at one point, sharing the stories, telling the stories together. She's, of course, picking up on all these cues of there's something wrong with this guy. He's a little jealous, a little frumpy. He's a little upset. He can't be the life of the party. He's refusing our Coke. And when he's holding that poker, I mean, it becomes that thing like, is he threatening me to hurt me physically, or is he doing this to intimidate me sexually? And I just like the fact that he ends up fucking himself with the poker. So.
Well, it is, it is
symbolic.
very it's very emblematic of a transfer of power, right? When she has this object, right, she has power, and he seems to be apprehensive of her,
and then she knows how to use it.
Yeah, and then when he has the object, clearly power is shifted, right? And now he's the one who's threatening and scary. And then at the end, as you rightly point out, he's penetrated by it, right? I'm not sure I want to go as far as to say like just literally like it's a penis, but
oh no,
but it certainly is sort of phallic in the sense that it's a I'm not sure this is the right term. It's a masculinizing kind of thing, which is when you hold it, you have that power which men have enjoyed.
Right,
traditionally, which is physical power over other people. Right. And she tries to wield it at the beginning, and he ends up wielding it at the end the way men always have. Right, with threat. And so, yeah, that's a really interesting sort of look at a fireplace poker as an object, because it is provocative.
Gemma, would you care to respond to that?
I'm just being a child and just giggling at how many times you said the word penis. I think it was probably about 35 penis moments in the last 10 minutes. I mean, I didn't pick up on that myself, but that I'm not attuned to phallic shapes and objects, perhaps as much. That's a complete lie. I am, but I didn't. That one, shall we say, slipped past me.
It's funny. I hadn't picked up on it as a phallic image in the movie because I'm so used to that being played so much more vaudevillian. The other week, I just rewatched a Brian De Palma film, Body Double. Okay, which is not one of his best films, but I have a nostalgic love for it for reasons. But there's a moment in the middle of the film where a woman is murdered with a big giant power drill, like an industrial sized power drill. And the way De Palma shoots this is from behind the killer from the waist down with the power drill in front of him. And it is 100% just this vaudevillian, big clown shoes, giant red nose on it, phallic symbol, right? There's no way that you can look at that and go, no, that's not a metaphor for this guy's dick, right? And so something that would be, and that's kind of what you're used to in Hollywood is when someone wants it to be that, they just don't know how to do it in any way that isn't bordering on absurdity. And so the idea that the fireplace poker could be phallic is I think is nuanced and is arguable, but it's not completely out of the realm of possibility, just given the way I think people think about power and threat.
I was thinking back to when we covered Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon, and he goes into a very long talk about how the machete is always this phallic symbol and how, like the survivor girl has to get it away from him to turn the power and blah, blah, blah. And it really fits what you were just saying about how Hollywood normally, I'm just going to make this terrible pun. Hollywood normally jams penises down our throats. Like they go out of their way. Like you're saying, it's always vaudevillian. It's always, look at this great symbolism I'm using. It's a dick, like
Hollywood regularly breaks the fourth wall. It's when they're trying to make any kind of metaphor really, but that one in particular, and and it's a big wink and a nod, like you see what I'm doing with this? Do you see? And that's what Brian De Palma is certainly doing in Body Double, especially because that's a film about sex and attraction. It's sort of one of the, it falls in the category of films that they don't make anymore, which were erotic thrillers.
So basically, we're saying that Hollywood treats symbolism the same way guys treat texts that they send at 1 a.m.
Yeah, more or less. I mean, I think for a lot of movies that don't fall into the art house category or indie category, modern indie category, they're looking to appeal to the largest, broadest, to the largest possible audience, and too much subtlety is going to go over a certain part of that audience's head, and so they just try to make sure that everybody knows exactly what's happening, and it doesn't always work. But in this instance, I think it's an interesting point of view, but I'm not sure I saw it at the time.
All right. Does anybody have anything they want to add before we wrap this up?
I love the stories that they chose, because the way this film worked for me is you could easily put yourself in this situation with friends or a coworker. As far as being in some situation where, when I was teaching, as a reward to my students, I would tell them this one ghost story. And watching this movie made me feel that same way I did when I would, every semester I would tell them that we block out all the lights, block out all the windows, turn off all the lights. We block off any little bit of light that could possibly peek through the cracks of the door. And it gets to kind of that thing that all of us like about horror. It's about the storytelling. It's about that fear of, at least a sense of the fear of the unknown, the creativity that comes along with it. And I just really like the way that Fanny especially is able to create these stories, and you get to see a good storyteller versus a bad storyteller. And then even with the collaboration, you get to see how somebody can be improved upon with someone who knows what they're doing. But even when they do the collaboration, it's not at least from what I saw from it, the collaboration wasn't demeaning at all to him, in the same sense you could probably see the way that she interrupts when he's telling the story and offering advice is kind of a little bit rude. But she's offering him helpful advice, which is, this is a better word choice. It will make your work better, but It's done in such a way that he feels by it. No, I think there's a wonderful element of contrast between the two of them as a storyteller. When he's at the beginning, when he's telling his story about the werewolf, and it sounds very familiar, it sounds very rote, and then she just throws off a line like, "What, you mean like the woman who lives in the attic?" And in just less than 10 words,
she's a lovely creepy moment.
She's told a story, right? That unnerves him, and it's such a wonderful contrast in the difference between the two of them as craftspeople, right? Is that she's surgically precise and he's still trying to find his way.
But also, she's just better than him.
Yeah, and she's just absolutely.
She's just better than him.
Better, yeah. You're absolutely right.
She's better, and she does the work.
Yep.
So so other media that there was a film that this reminded me of, which is older, and if people haven't seen it, I would encourage them to get it because it's absolutely brilliant. It's a film called Death Trap, and it starred Christopher Reeve and Michael Caine. And it came out in the early 80s, I want to say. And it's a very similar story. It's about two people in a remote cabin and they're working on a play called Death Trap. And this was actually a play. So it was a play that was adapted to a movie. And it has so many similar touchstones to Scare Me that a part of me feels like Scare Me has to be a love letter to Death Trap. And I have no idea whether Josh Rubin has seen that movie or not. But I imagine if he has any sort of cinematic literacy, he has. But it's wonderful because it's very in the same vein. It's a thriller. It's a mystery story in a single room in a remote cabin between writers, and it's absolutely brilliant. I would recommend anybody watch it if they love this movie.
Cool. Gemma, what about you?
I've been thinking about this, and I'm having a hard time thinking of another film that I've seen that's like this, to the point where I could recommend somebody watch. Do you know what I mean? It's
Oh, absolutely. I have the same problem.
There are themes and things. So one of the things that struck me was how different this representation of a woman in horror is to, let's say, Midsommar, where the main character, Florence Pugh's character, whose name I've forgotten now, gone out of my mind, but she's it's a very toxic relationship, the one she has with her boyfriend, and the boyfriend kind of reminds me a little bit of Fred in this, like in how he tries to steal other people's work, and how he's just an awful person, quite honestly. He tries to steal all his friends' ideas for his thesis. He doesn't pay any attention to the fact that his girlfriend has got quite strident mental health considerations and trauma that she's trying to deal with. He doesn't give a shit about giving her, like, making her take hallucinogenics or feeling peer pressured to take drugs when she's not very well. And just like that whole relationship was, again, very well played out and very beautifully drawn. But the female is a very different type of quite realistically drawn female.
Yeah. No, Dani in that film is very passive.
Dani,
right?
that's it. Yeah.
She's very delicate, and she's very deferential to the men who are around her.
She blames her. And the thing that it ties me in knots when you see her blaming herself for him being a complete cock, because because that's her thing, that's her shtick. She blames herself because it's easier to do that because he has kind of led her to believe it's her fault. And it's just, I think the payoff is kind of similar. It's done way more dramatically in that kind of Ari Aster style, where the last shot is of her face kind of smiling, and she has the last laugh.
Kind of a weird ecstasy.
Really, like, complete, like, yeah, and she's found her family and she's found her place, and it's all a bit strange and wrong and horrible, but it's the same kind of thing, these toxic guy getting his just desserts. And
right. I could do 2 more hours on Midsommar.
I think it's been spoken.
You're welcome to come back.
Last time.
There we go. But it's it's funny because you're absolutely right, Gemma. I don't think there's a lot of films that are like this. I found, it immediately made me think of Death Trap, but Death Trap is a film from fucking 30 years ago, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it stands up as a very unique piece of cinema and storytelling, which is that it's all about people talking, and it's all about the relationships between people, and it's not about jump scares, and it's not about paying off tropes that you expect when you see that cabin in the woods and the butcher block full of knives, right? It's an entirely different film. It's part of what makes it, I think, almost perfect to me.
What about you, Don? What films do you got?
The only film I could think of was Scare Package, and I think that's also on Shudder.
Yep.
They're kind of the same, at least the storytelling pieces to it. I would just pick a lot of anthology things, but those would be the closest that I would say to this.
And that's kind of where mine go. I'm going more for the anthology feel. So if you liked the telling each other stories and trying to scare each other, I have to hit Creep Show. Mm-hmm. The movies are fantastic, but also the series that was on Shudder last year, great, and season 2's coming soon. I don't know, man. Those stories really took me back and just gave me that feel that I'm looking for with Halloween. And as far as Halloween and anthologies, I hear there's 31 years of The Simpsons. So if you find a podcast that looked at those, you could go download those next. All right, guys. I want to thank you both for coming here today and doing this. I appreciate it so much, and this conversation's been fantastic.
Thank you for letting me drag myself on here to
absolutely do it anytime.
Insist myself upon you.
Why don't each of you tell us where to find you on social media?
I'll go first. You can type my name, Gemma Amor, into Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, and I will be there. And also pop my name into Google and various bits and pieces come up. And also there's a sort of growing number of interviews and things, readings and bits and bobs on YouTube. If you put my name into YouTube, I should come up in a couple of places there.
And you can also find Gemma on our Hereditary episode. So check that out.
Oh, yeah. That was fun.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Oh, I love that movie so much. You can find me on Twitter at Bracken MacLeod, BRACKEN MACLEOD. Same place on Facebook. It's, at the moment, it's all just angry political ranting because America is melting down. But, eventually I'll get back to being charming and entertaining.
It's been entertaining me.
Right. Yeah. And all of my books hopefully should be available at whatever fine retailers you go to. I always love it when people buy from indie bookstores, but I'm on Amazon and everywhere else. So, if anything I talked about makes you want to read it, check it out.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you both for coming. And I suppose that wraps it up till next week. So until then, I am James Sabata.
And I'm Don Guillory.
And we will see you next week here at thenecronama.com.